my great pleasure and my privilege this morning to welcome the President of the French Republic, Monsieur Emmanuel Macron. Soyez le bienvenu, Monsieur le Président. Please. Actually, we were talking about this type of event a year ago, and I'm glad that while it didn't work out totally last year, it is now working out perfectly well. So welcome again, Mr. President. For those of you who don't speak French, you might be well advised to have your headphones around, because I would imagine that Monsieur le Président will probably tend to use the French language, so be prepared for that. Also, I want to say that I am particularly grateful to President Macron for having agreed to the kind of format that I like, that my team likes, and that I know all of you like, because he's now not giving one of his major speeches. He's just given one at the École de Guerre just a week ago. He's given many, many important speeches over the last 3 years. But today, he has agreed to just discuss issues and take your questions. So let's give him a round of applause, and then we'll start. Do you have a microphone? Yeah. So I'll try to do this in English, and the President will respond in French or English or German, I don't know. So, Monsieur le Président, yesterday in this hall, Frank-Walter Steinmeier presented an important speech, a very, very pro-European speech, Europe as the destiny for Germany, strong commitment to Europe. So you have made important speeches on your vision of Europe, votre idée de l'Europe. So let me ask you the question this way. What kind of EU, what kind of Europe do you envisage if you look 5 or maybe even 10 years ahead? What kind of Europe would you like to see that you and your partners can create a stronger, a better, a more respected Europe? Tell us about your vision.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. First of all, I'd like to welcome all my friends and colleagues here. I'd like to say hello. So this is a far-reaching question, and I'm trying to answer it as quickly as I can, and therefore it will be a general answer. When I look at the world the way it looks like today, and when I look at the topics of your conference this year, we can see that there is a certain weakness of the West that has been observed. 15 years ago, we thought our values were universal values. They will always rule the world, and we are dominant in terms of military technology and so on. But now, when I look at the world, as it has looked like in the last 10 or 15 years, I can say that the values have changed and new values have added and new powers have arisen, like China. And there are regional powers that have arisen, that they are very close by and they do not share our values. There's Russia. They call for a different strategy. We are close to them. We're neighbors. We have rich resources in our neighborhood. Think of Africa. When you look at the world as it has been recently, and it will be in the next 20 or 30 years, we will lose population and Africa will explode in terms of population. Remember that. Then think of American policies, how they changed in the last few years. The government has somewhat withdrawn, or at least relations with Europe are being reviewed. So we have to take that into account. And this has reinforced me in my belief that we need a European strategy, a strategy that allows us to present ourselves as a strategic power and to view ourselves as a strategic power. The Europe I have in mind is a Europe that is sovereign, united, and democratic and acts as such. And in 10 years' time, I'd like to see a Europe that has enough leverage to act, to be sovereign when it comes to policies, to technology, migration, defense, feeding the world, and also in terms of climate protection, environmental protection, and a Europe which has relations with its neighbors, Russia and Africa and the Middle East. A Europe which has decided to define core that wants true sovereignty in the Eurozone, a Europe which is credible, and a Europe which has modernized itself and that has reviewed the rules that they believe in. It cannot be a Europe where we need unanimous decisions. When we look into the future, 10 or 15 years, we need more commonalities in the heart of Europe. And we need some acceptance that we have such a core of Europe, such a heart of Europe. That is, of course, the decision of sovereign countries. A heart that makes decisions and moves in the same direction with partners that are willing to do that. Partners that believe in our policies, single market, rules about convergency, rules about our neighborhood, and then countries that are less close to that core and a stable neighborhood. I think we're facing the hour of truth here. Europe offers us the possibility to protect our values, our priorities. We have a lot in common with the United States, freedom and so on. So this is why we fight together in numerous wars, but it's not quite the same as what America wants. So we need some freedom of action in Europe. We need our own strategy. We need to develop our own strategy. We do not have the same geographic conditions, not the same ideas about social equilibrium, about social welfare, and they are ideals we have to defend. And we need a policy of neighborhood. Mediterranean policies, that is a European thing, not a transatlantic thing. And the same goes for Russia. We need European policy, not just a transatlantic policy. This is what I would like Europe to be in 10 years' time. This is the Europe I'd like to see, a Europe that can protect the basis of its sovereignty, a Europe that has more vitality, and a Europe that is enthusiastic about its future. I'd like to close this point by saying that just like you, of course, I have listened to President Steinmeier's speech, and it is absolutely what I believe. I wasn't surprised by the speech. This is what I would like to subscribe to as well. He put it very clearly.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me remind all of you that if you want to ask a question of the President, the best way of doing it is use the electronic way. Use your app. If all goes well, maybe somebody could check this again. The questions should appear on my iPad. Maybe one of my team members could make sure that it actually works. So write your questions down and we'll pick them up. I will also try to identify this or that questioner that I know personally. So be prepared for that. We'll go to you, to the audience, in just a few minutes. On the bilateral issue, La France et l'Allemagne, I would think that you must have been quite frustrated over the last 2.5 years with what some of my friends in France, and surely the media, have called a non-answer from Germany to grant proposals coming from France. So now, yesterday, interestingly enough, and you alluded to it, the President of Germany and the Foreign Minister of Germany came up with a positive response to your invitation to start a strategic dialogue on defense and nuclear issues. So tell us a little bit about your degree of frustration with Germany at this moment.
I'm not a man of frustration, you know. No, I think this is a permanent story between our two countries. I remember several approaches or proposals made by Germans years or decades ago, waiting for French answers. Joschka Fischer made a great speech, waiting for a French answer. Schäuble-Lammers before. I mean, we have a story of proposals waiting for answers. I mean, first, I think at the European and the bilateral level, we worked very hard together during the past 2.5 years, past 3 years, with the SCAF and a lot of projects, and I do thank our ministers present here for the good work they made together. We launched what was thought as impossible, let's say 3 years ago. Let's imagine we will make the future aircraft in common with Germany. A lot of people probably in this room would have said to me, you are crazy. It will never happen. You have the Rafale and Dassault, we have already Airbus, let's stop the discussion. It's happening, and we are progressing. So we launched a series of bilateral approach, and we launched a series of new initiatives at the European scale on batteries, on universities, Europe of defense with a lot of initiatives, and we will probably revert to that. I think the big question mark now we have together is the magnitude of the answer and the speediness. And for me, the main challenge we have in front of us is our ability to address the core problem of the European perspective. Je pense aujourd'hui que la crise qui est la nôtre,
it's no longer the same crisis that we're facing today. It's not a crisis of European democracies, of European middle classes. In our countries, many people are doubtful. It's not Europe they doubt, but the idea of democracy. There's more extremism. We have to come up with a joint answer. What is our perspective for the next 20 or 30 years for Europe? This is what is at stake. So I'm not frustrated. Maybe I'm impatient. And I hope that at the bilateral Franco-German level, we can face up to the task to create a new dynamic of this European dimension. We need, and we have, a new team. And I'm happy to say that Thierry Breton is here today, our French commissioner, and also the High Representative Borrell is here today, and other commissioners are here today. So we do have a very good team. We have President Michel, we have Ms. von der Leyen at the head of the Commission, we have the new European Parliament, and this opens up new possibilities for climate action, for 5G initiatives. It stands for European ambition, and this is exactly what I have in mind. The key to me at European level, and I've tried to make it clear at my speech to the Sorbonne, first of all, we need to be faster. We need to act faster at European level when it comes to sovereign questions, as I mentioned before. And then technologically, how can we be faster? How can we invest faster? For our enterprises, for our companies and our rules, our initiatives, how can we be faster in proposing European initiatives? 5G, the cloud, artificial intelligence. Here we need European initiatives. What can we do as Europeans to face up to these challenges? How can we take care of the things that our populations are worried about? The climate, our borders, protecting our borders. For years we haven't been able to get to grips with these problems, but we have to. Our people expect us to cope with the problem of climate change. They're afraid of climate change, and sometimes they think we're not fast enough. We can only solve this at the European level. I would like to be faster in agreeing with Germany to be successful in coming up with joint initiatives. And the key to success is to be able to take risks together. We've done that in the past. If we don't take risks, we won't make progress. And that also means that our relationship has to be changed, has to be adapted. I believe in the future. I believe in our joint investment in the future. We are a continent that has stopped believing in its future. And when I look at the mixture of different policies, we're going to talk about this soon. We need to agree about our budget. We're talking about small numbers, 1.6, 1.7, whatever. That's not really proportionate to the magnitude of the tasks we're facing. It's not worth fighting about it. China, on the other hand, invests enormous amounts of money. It's all public money that is invested. It's not necessarily clear what they're doing. It's not always transparent, but they do invest a lot in the digital field. They have a climate initiative, don't forget that. So China is investing in its future, and so is the United States. They have decided to invest more public money. And this is a magnitude we have never seen before: defense, technology. And they set the course for the future. In Europe, we have to talk about at a level that we've agreed before, and we have to agree to a common budget. So after the crisis, there were too many rules, but the financial markets have not been regulated. This is done after the Anglo-Saxon rules. But insurances and banks are the key to economic success. So for the last 10 years, we have had this contraction of public and private funds, and this policy mix is not responsible. At the end of the day, it leads to this 0% interest rate that we have now. But the percentage of saving has increased in Europe. While we have no integrated capital and financial market in Europe, this capital cannot circulate. There's no cash flow between the countries. So while we have that, we will have that problem of too little investment for our economy. So they're going to buy American investment, American shares. So we are not fast enough in investing in our future. If in 10 or 15 years' time we have the industry and the rules we have for the future, so they will be prepared. But if they are not successful, it shows that we must invest in our future. And as I said, we have to be enthusiastic about the future, and we must invest in the future. And another reason I'm saying this is from a political point of view. That is the only option. We need to strengthen the European middle classes and reconcile them with our idea of the future. That is essential. The crisis in 2008, 2009, and 10 took longer for Europe to digest. We have problems in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, and we expected enormous sacrifices of the people there, unprecedented, especially the middle classes. Decrease of income, of pensions, and what was to be sold was sometimes sold to China. So, and then the next crisis came along, and everything had to be changed yet again. I come from a country that was prepared to take risks. So again, we had that pressure on the middle classes. What it means is, in Europe, we have to be clear about this, where the heart of democracy used to beat, there is now a lot of doubt about democracy. The impression is whenever there's economic problems, we have to pay. Whenever there's a problem, we are the ones who have to pay. There is no fair burden sharing. So how can we retain our enthusiasm about the future? And how can we include the middle classes? Europe is an adventure of freedom, progress for the middle classes, and social market economy, and that is a very important subject here in Germany. So if there's no perspective for the middle classes, we cannot make progress. So this is why people doubt the nature of Europe, the future of Europe and of democracy. This is what we have to do at the Franco-German level. It's not about frustration. I am impatient because I believe we need to be faster in our reaction. We need a clear answer to our population. We, the Franco-German tandem, if we do not find an answer to these problems, if we do not come up with a perspective for the middle classes, that will be a historic failure.
Monsieur le Président, si vous le permettez, I would like to go back to your most recent important speech, the one at the École de Guerre a week ago. In that speech you said, and I wrote it down, that French nuclear forces strengthened European security and also had, and I quote, a truly European dimension, unquote. Now, I am old enough to remember the 1974 Ottawa Declaration of NATO, where NATO members explicitly stated that French and British nuclear forces contributed, and I quote from that text, 1974, contributed to the overall strengthening of deterrence of the alliance, and that the nuclear states in NATO would undertake to make the necessary contribution to maintain the common defense. So when I look at that old text and what you said last week, I hope it is okay for me to ask the question, what's new? What's new in what you said, or what are you hinting at? Where would you like to go on this question of nuclear strategy and nuclear defense for Europe, for France in the 21st century?
C'est la question.
So it's a question of relationships and relations between the ambitions of NATO and Europe. I'm convinced that we need a much stronger Europe in defense. So I think that what we've achieved in the last few years, a European Defense Fund, increased cooperation, a European Intervention Initiative, this is what I said at my Sorbonne speech, that these things are crucial. These things are crucial so that we have European funds available, so that we can develop joint capabilities like the Future Combat Air System or the Main Ground Combat System, MGCS, two great examples for Franco-German cooperation, and we need a joint strategy for defense. And I think we need that due to reasons of sovereignty. This has been misunderstood very often. It's not a project against NATO or instead of NATO. And I've said it before, the common security in Europe has two pillars, and one of these pillars is NATO, and the other one is a Europe of defense. These are no alternatives. It's just a logical consequence of what happened in recent years. We have an American partner telling us, you need to invest more in your own security. And that is true. The Americans telling us that we, Europeans, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, have invested less and less in security because the world changed, and that's true. And the Americans say we are not the sheriff to provide for security in your neighborhood. So if I look what has been done under Obama, I can say that there was a new strategic position of the United States, fewer investments in the Middle East and the Pacific, and Americans say that the Europeans need to take more initiative. I do believe we need NATO. This is absolutely clear. We need to work coherently with NATO and in response to American desires. And this is how we have to create our own capability that bestows credibility on us so that we can protect ourselves and that we can be able to act. I say that because this is fundamental also with a view to foreign policy. If we do not have the ability to act, then in foreign policy, we will not be credible, especially with regards to the United States. When it comes to Iran, we have our own opinion. I talked about sovereignty. Economic and militarily, we cannot have our own diplomacy, and we saw that with the JCPOA. So we do need a Europe of defense. And in this framework, I want to make progress in different areas. What I said is indeed new, actually, and I picked up on that last week. So it's nothing new with a view to NATO. In the framework of NATO, we do make our contributions, yes, but we do not participate in exercises. This has always been the case. But I'm telling you now that we need to have a strategic dialogue with all partners who want that, also about nuclear topics. And in this framework, we're willing to conduct joint exercises, because the goal of that is a joint strategic culture. So in a European sense, it's about this. France believes in a Europe of defense. We are willing to undertake and walk down that path together with our partners to come to a new strategic dialogue. I think this is a very important point, and this is indeed a novelty to do that in the framework of a Europe of defense, also in the framework of NATO. Let's look at all the things that we didn't think of in our relations in the past. When it comes to military strength and power, many things have not been said. We've gotten to a point where we do need to take things into consideration. There are things that we have not taken into account when it comes to Germany or the east of Europe. And so we, especially with the history that we have, we need to address these topics. We built Europe and rebuilt Europe, and we reduced Germany's power. That's what we did in the beginning, especially militarily. And then after that, we slowly built this up. France, the UK, then procured nuclear weapons. Germany didn't. But Germany had very indirect discussions through the United States. And so basically, we can almost talk about U.S. nuclear assets, but not about British or French nuclear assets, because it always had to go through the United States. I think now we have to be able to say clearly that if we want a sovereign Europe, if we want to protect our citizens, then we do need to look at that very aspect, also with a view to Germany. I'm speaking as the French president here, of course, with the weight of our shared history on our shoulders, but we have to overcome this heavy history with our capabilities. I know this debate is not easy in Germany, but I do believe that we have to be able to conduct a calm debate, a level-headed debate. So we can not always have to go through the United States. No, we have to think in a European way as well. And if you look to the east, the eastern part of Europe, I have to say that since the fall of the Berlin Wall, there's another topic that has never been raised. Eastern Europe kind of left us in the lurch in a certain sense. It was just accepted that in 1947, the Soviet Union built its empire. There were, however, relations with the Americans who supported us. And the questions that arose with a view to Europe, with a view to the reunification of Germany and the unity in Europe, the unity also with our neighbors in Eastern Europe, leads to a question. And the question is this: how can we provide for the security and the common trust in Europe? This is an important and a good topic. I know there's a lot of insecurity there right now. There is insecurity vis-a-vis the confidence in the Europe of defense. We need to address that. I know I talked for quite a while, but that was important for me to be able to say that.
If I may modestly add, I think you are absolutely right that, of course, you have in France, because you have been a nuclear country for so long, you have a certain culture of knowledge and of discussion. This country is a country which has renunciated nuclear weapons. We have, including for that particular reason, much greater difficulties embracing the issue and understanding the complexities. So it's not an easy discussion. Before turning to questions from all of you, let me ask one last question. You have said, Mr. President, when you spoke about Russia, you have said, and I quote, "Pushing away Russia from Europe," unquote, "would be a major strategic error." Now, my question is a very simple one. After your recent visit to Poland, for example, do you expect our Eastern European partners and allies to support you in this vision of a new and reinvigorated, a different kind of relationship with Russia? And what do you think President Zelensky will want to say about this, who will speak in the other room in about an hour? In other words, isn't the unresolved Ukraine, Donbass issue a huge obstacle to any kind of renovated relationship with Russia at this moment? So let us share with us your views about how to deal with Russia as we go forward.
I want to take stock of where we are with Russia right now and where we could move to with Russia. In recent years, we, of course, took a stance towards Russia, and we have been a bit more distrustful, and there are reasons for that. We could talk more about these reasons, but that's the way it is. So let's look at the past few years. The distrust we developed towards Russia meant that we were weaker in our appearance. In 2013 and 14, we said a red line was crossed in Syria, but nobody did anything about that. So this is our strategy. It seems to be distrustful. We do no longer, if we want to step up our values, we have to appear stronger as well. Russia used to be weak. And then look what happened after the red line was crossed, and when we just let them cross it, the reaction was clear. The mistake in Syria has been corrected since then. Other powers entered into the Syrian conflict, but we just let it happen, that the Russians can appear more assertive, and at the end of the day, the Ukraine activities were also a consequence of our behavior. When I was running for president in France, and what happened was that right before the first round of elections, my election campaign team was under attack. I know where the attack came from, but I also know that being skeptical and weak and being a neighbor on top of all of that, and not trusting, and also having the US not trusting Russia, and us being a neighbor, as I said, then that's not a policy, the way we acted. So there are many frozen conflicts now. There are more conflicts in cyberspace, sanctions that didn't change one bit in Russia. I don't think we should abolish the sanctions. I'm just stating that the sanctions didn't work. Sanctions and counter-sanctions didn't really work out. We Europeans suffer as much from the sanctions as the Russians do, and the result is not exactly positive. So let's look at all of this. Again, things won't change overnight. We won't invite them and say, well, come over and we'll make everything better. No, I just want to say we need a credible strategy for Russia. A first scenario could be to keep up our skepticism and appear more brutal and act more brutally. To make sure that our red lines are being held up. Do we want that? Do we want to do that together? I think nobody in this room agrees with me on that position. Secondly, we need to be more demanding. We don't never leave our position. We don't let go. But we need a strategic dialogue because the current situation is the worst situation possible that you could imagine. We talk less and less, but have more and more conflicts. And at the same time, we're not able of settling these conflicts. So such an approach needs time. But I think it is a path that finally could be credible. And in doing that, and you said that, Mr. Ischinger, we will make progress. For more than 3 years, there was no meeting in the Normandy format on Ukraine, but we want to relaunch this dialogue. President Putin accepted that. For more than 3 years, he did not accept it. So we have a summit in the Normandy format coming up. And there were successes that were unprecedented. There were successes between the federal chancellor and Putin as well, President Putin as well. And after the summit, prisoners were exchanged. as it has never been the case before. And there were security measures that the Minsk agreement doesn't even foresee. I'm not naive. There are many other problems as well. But a certain dynamism started. And I will keep talking with the chancellor at the next meeting hopefully in April in Berlin. We don't have a lot of time, but at least we reinvigorated the process. And the strategic dialogue with Russia needs to rest on the opportunity to thaw frozen conflicts, on the opportunity to address cyber issues, and to talk about space and military aspects in space. We need to be able to talk about addressing external conflicts like Syria. We share Russia's opinion. Whatever happens in Idlib is not acceptable. And these proposals were not coming from France. Historically seen, the situation also has to do a lot with our weakness and with what awaits us in this theater of operations. So we do need to enter into a dialogue with Russia here as well and take on responsibility. Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and so Russia cannot keep blocking progress in the Security Council. I'm very pleased with the fact that President Putin also agreed to a G5 meeting. And so I hope that we will be able to make progress. So the first step needs to be a European coordination, also along the lines of the Aachen Agreement. I keep talking to my Polish colleagues. Of course, they are worried, they are concerned. Geography and history, of course, play their role here as well. But what else can we do? What remains? When we want to start dialogue and create trust, then that's also beneficial for Poland. And one last thing. If I put myself in Russia's shoes, what's Russia's future perspective? You always have to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So in recent years, there has been a great military armada that was built up in Russia. They invested a lot into the military. They built a military force and created something that they thought was impossible 20 years ago. They are now more powerful on the ground, at sea, in space. And so the strategy for Russia, I think, is not viable in a financial way. Russia has a GDP that corresponds with the GDP of a medium-sized power. So if I imagine I was Russia, I think, yes, right now they're still credible, but in 20 years' time, I'm not so sure. So Russia has the same weakness, has exploited our weakness and our uncertainty in conflicts like Libya and Syria. Is this going to last? I don't know. But what are Russia's opportunities, Russia's options? Standing alone? That's difficult. It's a huge country, a few people. They need allies. An alliance with China? Well, we pushed them towards that after 2013 and 2014, but I don't think that an alliance with China will be sustainable for Russia. China has never really culturally entered into such an alliance. President Putin and also his conservative political stance leads to the fact that such an alliance won't come into being, I believe. And also China wants to be more autonomous. And this does not go hand in hand with Russia's pride. I analyze that politically now. So they do need a European partner in Russia. I said it in Poland as well. I'm not pro-Russian or pro-anti-Russian. I'm just pro-European. But if you look at the geographic facts, it's clear that we need to do something together. We need to build a security architecture of mutual trust. And that means also that we need to give Russia a strategic option.
A little later this afternoon, after the lunch break, we will have Sergei Lavrov right here, and we can ask him, I hope somebody will ask him the question about how sustainable this Russian foreign policy is, and maybe we'll quote what you just said to him and see how he reacts.
Je vous remercie de m'aider à faire prospérer l'initiative.
I think we have good perspectives with Russia.
From the audience. With your permission, the first question comes from Anne-Marie Slaughter. Where is Anne-Marie? In the audience somewhere. way back. So I'll read it to make this brief. Question to President Macron from Anne-Marie Slaughter, who comes from Washington, former senior official at the State Department, now Chief Executive Officer of New America Foundation. So question, you speak eloquently and compellingly of a European strategy, not an EU strategy, although you point out the need for a different EU to be effective. When you speak of a European strategy, are you still including the UK? Question mark.
C'est une très bonne question. Les formats sont multiples, parce que quand je parle d'une stratégie européenne, il y a évidemment l'Union européenne.
Yes, it's a very good question. Of course, it includes the EU, but within the EU, we can advance with some states if others are unwilling to go along. This is why we have increased military cooperation, for example. We have an initiative that we started between the different governments. They agreed on that. That's the intervention initiative, and several European countries, not all of them, have decided to go along with that. Some are NATO members, others are not. I'm thinking of Finland. So in that context, in Europe of defense, yes, of course, the United Kingdom is part of it. They belong with us because they are a very important ally. And we, as France, have two things in common with them. First of all, we are a member of the UN Security Council, and we are nuclear powers, and this is based on bilateral treaties. And we did not suffer from Brexit. We still have this vision of Europe at defense, and we need various formats. For that, we need a strategic culture that will be increasingly close, and that, of course, includes the United Kingdom because of the current treaties and agreements and future initiatives. And I think we as Europeans have a task to create coordination formats for the United Kingdom for the future, and that includes the strategic level. We will have a kind of a Security Council in Europe. We started that with the Aachen Agreement. We started it between France and Germany, and we will continue along that road. We need that at the European level as well. We need regular meetings, and we need to include the United Kingdom in this. So the answer is yes.
I think it's Matthias Döpfner from Springer. He's tall enough to stand up and be seen. So, Matthias, your question.
Monsieur le Président, one question to the short term and one to the long term. In the short term, are you afraid that Russian intelligence and Russian AI could manipulate the next election in France to the advantage of Marine Le Pen? And the question to the long term, in a post-Putin era, could you imagine that the old dream of an amorous alliance, an alliance between America, Europe, and Russia, could develop, or is that a dream?
Sur votre première question.
Yes, your first question. I will not try and revert to that old debate whether intervention for one or another candidate took place, whether that has happened in the past. But the strategy of Russia has been to monitor the political movements in the past and to support non-democratic movements, anti-migration, anti-democratic, very conservative forces and anti-alliance forces. So these are partners that do not want Europe to become closer. They do not want to develop Europe further. So this is why Russia has long been seen as a country. It's better to have 27 divided states rather than 27 states acting together. But this is not our approach, so we need a new strategy. We stand united. We want a joint approach with a Russia that is willing to build something, even though we do not agree on everything. I believe Russia will remain a country that tries to intervene, either directly or by proxies, by services. I do not believe in miracles. I believe in policies. So human beings can change things if we have the means to do so. I do not think things will change spontaneously and from one day to the other, and everything will be light and the world will be different. No, there will always be such interventions. There will always be this kind of meddling. In France, we are not used to saying who did it, who's done it. Of course, we can follow certain attacks up, but we do not make it public. Some people do, some countries do, and sometimes we are in dialogue with other countries. Sometimes they are public agents, to put it vaguely. And sometimes it's private perpetrators, private proxies. So Russia is very aggressive and will certainly continue to be that in the next months and years to come. And there will always be such actors whenever it comes to elections. We needn't confine ourselves to Russia. There are other countries who do the same thing. There are ultra-right American groups, for example, that have interfered in European elections, and of course it's not legal. So we need to be far-sighted, we need a broad view of the situation, and we need to be clear about what must we do. We need to defend ourselves technologically, also by cooperation between the intelligence services, and also cooperation between our legal systems. We have very few antibodies against this kind of attack, and that is the weakness of European democracies. In all democracies of the world, not only in Europe, changes to the system through the media, through technologies, always lead to a lack of antibodies we need to protect democracy. So that is one of the great challenges. Meddling by private players, technologies, deepfake, manipulation, manipulation of information. Information can be spread very quickly along different channels and we cannot verify it. And that's the same in all democratic systems. This has an immediate effect, deterring people, intimidating people. And that is incompatible with systems that are values-based, that are based on freedom, freedom of opinion, freedom of the press, and so on. Systems that were developed in the late 19th century. So, of course, freedom of movement and so on, it's all very fine. But these are the rules of the 19th century. We have adapted them, but the main rules date back to the 19th century. So we are vulnerable. We are very vulnerable. We cannot react quickly enough. Technologically, legally, we cannot react quickly enough in order to counter these strategies. That is the main problem, I believe. So Russia will remain a player on this stage, and we need to take initiatives. We need de-escalation, but also transparency. We need to act together transparently. This is what we should do in the next few months. This has to be our position vis-à-vis Russia. Whenever such private or public actors intervene in our democracies or the democracies of our partners, we need to be quick in our reaction, methodic, and we need to be clear about who did it, and we need to agree on sanctions. So we do need a dialogue. We need to stand up to this new method of destabilization, this criminal method of destabilization. We need to act against private or public actors. Nothing is impossible, and we will find solutions to many problems, and there will be direct and indirect repercussions. Also, when you think of Chinese intervention, the Chinese method also determines the American strategy. That is not surprising, and that is justified. It goes for trade, it goes for strategic deliberations, and so on. So if China continues to rise, and if it continues to pursue policies aimed at infrastructure, digital development, an expansive strategy, a strategy of expansion and a strategy of increasing its presence in the Atlantic and Pacific area, that will mean that the interest of the other major powers, the United States and so on, that may be overtaken by China at some point in economic terms. So we need to develop something to react to this development. What you described is certainly not impossible, but it all depends on China's future success and strategies. That's one thing. And secondly, it depends on our European capacity to react to this development. If we have a joint strategy, we can develop it together with the Americans.
That our time is rapidly evaporating, so I think we have time for maybe 1.5 last questions. One I'll read, and one I think goes to Joe Joffe of Die Zeit. So if somebody could give a microphone to Joe Joffe while I read this question to you. This comes from the Berlin bureau chief of The Economist, Tom Nuttall. Where are you, Tom? Somewhere in the room. The question is the following. Now that the European Commission has revised its methodology for EU enlargement, this is about the Balkans, will France lift its veto on beginning accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania? If so, when? Question mark.
Premier point, si vous m'autorisez, je récuse le terme de veto français.
I don't really like this term of veto. I know, Ambassador. But I don't really like the term, so I reject that term. It doesn't take a lot of courage to hide between fronts whenever there's disagreement. So this is not about not taking up negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. But I'd like to add one thing. Many countries were opposed to that. And I think it is a major mistake, or it was a major mistake, to separate this from the negotiations with North Macedonia. So I said there is one condition, one prerequisite. We need to change the rules for expansion. It is too bureaucratic, it is not transparent enough. We need to change these rules. So we need to talk about expansion. But this discussion must be clearer and reversible. So we must be able to advance more quickly with countries that make quicker progresses. We need to invest in such candidates that are successful. But also we need to be able to walk away from that once we see it doesn't work. So it shouldn't be a theological system. Well, many people don't understand that term. We are a non-theological country. Well, we need to be able to walk away from such a development and go back to the previous position. So that was our condition. But I'm quite determined here. We need to be strict here. When we're talking about budget aspects, when we talk about this in March, we'll have to see what the Commission says, what progress we expect these candidates to make, Albania and North Macedonia. I've talked about the prerequisites, and if the results are positive, if there's confidence that this will work, then of course we should be able to start negotiations. But there are two things you need to keep in mind. First, the strategic objective we pursue in the Western Balkans is we need to keep them in Europe. We need to firmly anchor them in Europe, and that is a strategic objective that I support. If and when we talk to them about expansion or about accession, is that a good methodology? Question mark. I greatly respect President Vučić. He does an excellent job and he is a great leader. But what happens there is determined by Russia and China, not by Europe. So at the end of the day, it has no bearing on the life of the population. So we need to make sure we invest in culture, in infrastructure. We've had negotiations with Serbia for 5 years, and in 2 years' time, we will say, well, yes, Serbia will have to join at last. They're getting impatient, and rightly so. But others have made that investment, and I think this is a very theoretical position we have here. If we want to include the Balkans in Europe, we must invest into culture, language, infrastructure. I know what we did from the French side. That's what we should do rather than just start negotiations. That is, there's some hypocrisy to that. So we start negotiations, but behind closed doors we say, no, they have no chance of joining in the next 50 or 20 years. It's not reasonable. So we are mocking these people, aren't we? And this is what I call hypocrisy. It is frustrating for those countries. We tell them in 10 or 15 years you can't join in the next 10 or 15 years. No, we must tell them you can join if you fulfill the conditions. And when we think of neighbors, we only talk about enlargement, EU enlargement. It doesn't work with so many countries. We are not fast enough. We are not agile enough. It can't work with 22, 23 countries. So we need a common foreign policy. Do you think that will be easier with more members? Policy towards Turkey and Russia. We're not consistent here. Those who tell us we must be faster when it comes to new members, they say, okay, but we don't want to spend more than 1% of our GDP. That doesn't work. So we want to make the slice of bread bigger, but you add less butter to it. So the implicit strategy we have in Europe is that Europe is a large market that keeps expanding. It's not a political power. A political power has certain preferences, it has convergences, it has to be serious about how it behaves towards its neighbors. It's not the only idea to extend the club as quickly as possible. That is my opinion.
To Joe Yoffe.
Monsieur le Président, 2 quick questions which allow for quick answers. One thing is that the core issue of Europe for the last 67 years has been who leads and who follows. Now the question is, would you like to be led by Mrs. Merkel, or would Mrs. Merkel like to be led by you? The second question is, in the strategic culture that you've painted, this defensive unity that you want, what language will we all speak, 27 nations?
Sorry, I missed you. I missed the end of it.
What language will these 27 nations speak? What language?
Sur la première question, je me permettrai d'être en
So the first question, I don't quite agree with you. The statement that you made. I think it's in the DNA of the European Union. It's not to be led by someone. I think the project of the founding fathers of the EU meant for us to live in peace. For centuries, for millennia, in the Middle Ages and later, we've always had hegemonial aspirations in Europe. And we have created a strategy that has enabled us to live together without any hegemonial powers, without hegemony. There are larger nations, there are smaller ones, yes. But we cannot say there's one dominant power. I think that's important. There has never been a federal chancellor that led the way for the rest, or French president. That is important. That is in the DNA of the EU. It is not a hegemonial project. And this is a treasure we've created. Let's not forget that. This is why we've lived for such a long time in peace and prosperity. Our continent has always gone through wars, but for the last 70 years, we have lived in peace. I do not want to lead Chancellor Merkel, and I do not want to be led by her. It is at odds with the basic idea that is behind Europe. But I do know one thing. The Franco-German couple and the ambition of Europe is not sufficient. From an historical point of view, demographic point of view, strategic point of view, it works well. But when France and Germany agree, it's not enough in order to set in motion a dynamic development. But if we disagree, it can block everything in the EU. So what I want to achieve is for us to go on maintaining our unity between France and Germany, and that will enable us to make progress. And to go forward with more ambition, with more speed, I think that is the key if we want to face up to the challenges of the future. I know that Chancellor Merkel is aware of that, and we keep talking about it. But we respect each other, and we cooperate each other. That is very important. As you can see, I have a certain position, but now we're talking about Brexit, a Europe of 27 nations, the United Kingdom. Well, let's try and be serious. Umberto Eco once said a good sentence. He says, the language of Europe is translation. And it's true. You know what? Even when it comes to strategic aspects, defense aspects, it is no problem. On the contrary, every country has its own ideas. We have an Esperanto language for all of us. It's English, and it works fine for the working level. And that's what we do. But I think it is a good thing to have this diversity of language. I don't think there's one language that should be dominant. And that enables us to protect our differences too. It's not necessarily the same culture. We don't have the same opinion about everything. The terms are not always the same. When it comes to certain aspects, we have our languages, we try to work together, and we explain what we want. This is how it works. We should keep all the European languages. But the spirit of responsibility for the world, the awareness that we need to move forward faster, that we need to be far-sighted, this is what I meant.
Merci à vous. Merci beaucoup.